Hey there, folks. It's been a little while. I know I was starting to get things out on a more regular pace, but I've I have a very busy life, and I've had a lot of other stuff going on. And it's been a little while since we've talked, and somebody actually requested me to cover a topic that I kind of assumed I'd covered, and I guess I sort of had, like in some shorts over on the Council of Geeks channel, and like as part of a video on another topic, I've mentioned this, but I haven't devoted a video to this. And it seems like there are some parts of the LGBTQI plus community where this is either a question or a source of tension. Are non-binary people trans? Yes, they are. Thank you very much for your time. You can go to Patreon and support me. There's a link in the description. Okay, fine. The thing is, though, it actually is that simple. When I see the arguments from people against or questioning why non-binary would be considered trans, it's always overcomplicating the core fact of what trans is. Cisgender, as a reminder, is someone who identifies as the gender they were assigned at birth. Transgender, which as a reminder is an umbrella term, is to refer to anyone whose gender does not match what they were assigned at birth. Nobody gets assigned non-binary at birth. Definitionally, non-binary people are trans. They fall under the trans umbrella. And it actually is that simple and that straightforward. But this is where you get people, frustratingly often from within the LGBTQI plus community, going, yeah, but, about this or that, and often lumping non-binary people together as if that is not also an umbrella term. Like, maybe here's the first thing we need to establish. I already said trans is an umbrella term because trans refers to this generalized thing of not identifying with the gender you were assigned at birth. Now, within that umbrella, you have trans men, trans women, non-binary, gender fluid, agender, a ton of stuff. Now, non-binary, which is under the trans umbrella, is also an umbrella. And it's an umbrella for anyone who doesn't identify with the gender they were assigned at birth, but also isn't transitioning along the binary. So transitioning along the binary would be if you are a trans woman. Assigned male at birth, you transition to a woman. If you are a trans man, assigned female at birth, and then transitioned into being a man. Those are binary transitions. But anything else is a form of non-binary. And this can include demigenders, which, if you're not familiar with that one, is someone who, if they have a sense of their gender at all, it tends to be one or the other. So you have demigirls, demiboys, but they don't always feel like they have much of a sense of gender. Not having a real sense of gender, or having a sense of gender that doesn't match either male or female. And like, I'm not going to go down the side road of like, well, are you just, what do you mean by you don't have a sense of either being male or female? Does that just mean you don't fit with the stereotypes? You don't like girly things or manly things? And is this all just about stereotypes and fashion? Like, no, it's not. But we need to move past that. If you're going to engage with anything I'm talking about, I need you to at least accept that having a sense of oneself is not just about not fitting stereotypes. Now, one can push against them and still remain that gender. There are plenty of cisgender women who push against gender stereotypes and have no interest in girly things. There are plenty of cisgender men who push against gender stereotypes and have no interest in manly things. That does not make them any less cis. But the thing is, I can't get stuck on this because I don't know how to explain it to someone who has never had cause to question their gender or has never really had a sense of it shifting or not fitting who they are, i.e. the vast majority of cisgender people. I don't know what to relate it to so that you understand what it does feel like. So I need you to believe me when I tell you that no, it's not just about fashion and stereotypes, but I need you to not just get hung up on the, well, then what is it then? That's not what this video is today. And if I ever figure out a good way to explain to cisgender people what it feels like, I will tell you. I haven't because I don't know what to compare it to. Every comparison I've ever seen or have thought of has problems in it that cause some cisgender people to still be argumentative, like, well, if it's like that, then, well, it's not exactly like that, but it's the best I can come up with. If I ever come up with a great way to explain it, I will. But I haven't, so we're not doing that. Anyway, that turned into more of a tangent than I intended. But falling along non-binary, there's also agender people who feel like they really have no sense of gender at all, and there are people who feel like they do have a sense of gender, but it's somewhere in the middle. Me being gender fluid, that is a form of non-binary. My sense of gender, it waffles. It used to wander the entire spectrum back when I still had a sense of my masculinity. I've largely moved past that. I can't remember the last time I had a day where I really identified masculinely, but there are certainly still days where I identify basically, like, I know I present very femme on this channel, but that's not the entirety of my everyday. That's me looking nice for the camera. So, anyways, to get back to what I was saying, non-binary is an umbrella under an umbrella. Trans is an umbrella. Non-binary is an umbrella over that. So I think part of the problem with people who question whether or not non-binary is trans, they're often lumping all non-binary as if it's one thing, when it's actually just a descriptor of many things that are all varying, and the answers for those specific things of what that is going to be different. But again, the specifics shouldn't really matter, because you don't identify with the gender you assigned at birth, therefore you're trans. Now, does that mean that non-binary people have a desire to be an active part of the trans community, or are demanding a place in trans spaces? Maybe, but not necessarily. I mean, one of the complicated things about being trans at this point is it makes your nature inherently political. You can't just exist, because your existence and what you are has become a partisan and political issue. So wanting to just exist as any form of trans, be it non-binary or anything else, and not be pulled into the struggle of the community is, I mean, you kind of are by default. But I think part of what often happens with people who get hung up on the idea that non-binary people aren't trans, it ultimately boils down to their gatekeeping the trans experience. They're gatekeeping what it is to be trans. Now, some of this I've addressed before, because I have done multiple videos about the idea of being trans without having dysphoria. I am going to put a link to, I think, the second one that I did on that, which is explaining why someone who does not have severe dysphoria might still choose to transition. That wasn't the first one I did. It's not the only one I did, but I think that's the one I'm going to link to in this case. But the thing is, I've already kind of tackled the idea that dysphoria isn't and shouldn't be a measure and a definition of being trans. Because to do that, first of all, defines us by our pain. Medicalizing being trans and defining it as a problem that needs fixing, I don't think is helpful anymore. There was honestly a time when it was helpful, when the more medicalized approach to it is what got doctors and psychologists to study us and get the understanding of us that they now have, because it was being looked at and treated as a problem. But at this point, we have enough research on us that treating it as a problem or an imbalance or a harm that transition is meant to correct, I don't think that's as helpful as it once was, and I think it's actually starting to become harmful. Transmedicalists is an entire sort of separate thing that happens within the trans community. I don't want to get hung up on that. But I think that is part of it, because I think for many people, even within the LGBTQIA plus community, they look at people who identify as non-binary, and I think what a lot of them think they see, because keep in mind, you don't know somebody's mind. You don't know if they are or aren't experiencing dysphoria unless they tell you. But what they see in their mind is somebody who just has unusual fashion and is just saying that they identify as something. Many people, well, not many, but some people within the transgender community will get hung up on the idea of, well, if you have dysphoria, you should be on hormones. If you actually think that you aren't what you were assigned at birth, you should be getting top surgery if you were assigned female at birth, or, getting hair removal if you were assigned male at birth, or any number of these things. Again, it's often gatekeeping done by people who themselves are not non-binary. It's an attempt at exclusion. And I don't want to get into armchair psychology of trying to figure out why they feel it is necessary to do this. Well, I will a tiny bit. I think what scares some members of even specifically the trans community is that for many non-binary people, they don't go on hormones. They don't get surgery, but they request they, them pronouns and a name change and present themselves in a way that feels best to them. And I think some trans people find that threatening because from the outside, someone in bad faith could go, well, all they're doing is fashion. So that's not valid. And if that's not valid, is any of this trans stuff valid? Now, this entire argument is just bunk across the board. First of all, starting with the fact that many non-binary people do have dysphoria. Now, the way that dysphoria manifests might be severe, it might be mild, and it also might look very different from what a binary trans person experiences in terms of dysphoria. I've talked about the fact that I have, since the amount of transition and going on HRT, I have experienced dysphoria at this point. Something that I feel comfortable identifying as that. But that has not changed my mind that you don't need dysphoria to be valid as a trans person. Because I think it really scares a lot of trans people with the attempts to legislate us out of existence that are going on in the United States and other places. I think acknowledging that someone who doesn't go on hormones and who isn't getting surgeries and who just requests a different name, different pronouns, and has a unique fashion sense is valid as a form of trans, I think they fear that somehow invalidates their arguments against what is attempting to be done to us. But I don't think you do yourself any favors by excluding valid members of the community. Because even if we step out of non-binary, if someone can't afford hormones, can't afford surgery, but can get a new wardrobe, request a name change, and the pronouns of what is generally considered to be the opposing gender, are they not still valid as trans? We're not even talking about non-binary. I'm talking about a binary trans person, a trans man or trans woman. If they can't get those things, and all they've done is request a name change and a pronoun change and change their clothes, they are still valid. They have to be. Because otherwise you are defining transness by medical definitions again. You're gatekeeping it by access. And whether this makes you comfortable or not, you have to also accept that if someone is still valid as trans without having hormone replacement therapy, without having surgeries, because they can't afford it, then so is someone who identifies as something other than they were assigned at birth, who also does not want or feel that they need those things. They are also still valid as trans. And they are also still valid as trans if they don't identify on the binary spectrum of man or woman. I understand that fear of what is happening and the history of the medicalized approach and view of transness had got us to a certain point. But I think that medicalized view has taken us as far as it's going to. And at this point, continuing to hold on to that and excluding people either because they cannot access or do not desire specific medical procedures, that it makes them not trans in some way, I think all we do is give ammunition to the concept that some of us aren't valid. I know for a fact that the right loves to demonize the concept of basically just, I'm trans because I say so. They love to demonize that because then they spin their elaborate fantasies of, well, someone's just going to identify as a woman. Some guy's just going to say he's a woman and walk into a woman's locker room and just stare at women. It's like, okay, well, first of all, the creepy behavior can still be complained about, regardless of the gender. If a woman goes into a locker room and is just standing there staring at naked people, you should be complaining about them to the management of wherever you are, regardless of what their assigned gender at birth is. They spin these elaborate fantasies that the idea of just saying that you are something other than what you were assigned at birth somehow gives you access to all these things. Then you'll do this horrible stuff when the horrible stuff is actually criminalized. So why don't you punish people who actually do that, as opposed to trying to nip it in the bud and just invalidating and trying to eliminate trans people? I understand where their nonsense comes from. And I also understand the desire of some trans people to try and head that off at the pass by saying, no, but it's not just because I say so. It kind of is. It is if you say, if you identify, if you sincerely know that you are not what you're assigned at birth, you are trans. That is what it is. And I know that makes some of us uncomfortable. Well, I know it makes the right apoplectic, but I know that makes some of us within the community uncomfortable. But that is what it is. The gatekeeping that you're doing, trying to head them off, trying to head off the right, is doing nothing but harm those that are among our own community. And I know that if this video does any kind of numbers at all, which it probably won't, my videos usually don't, but if it does, I know that people are going to take that last thing that I said and just run a million miles with it. But everything, no matter what your trans journey is, whether it involves hormones, whether it involves surgery, whether it involves anything else, it starts with, I know what I am. I know what my identity is, regardless of my body, regardless of my history, regardless of what I was assigned at birth. And that seed, that is what makes you trans. Where your journey takes you after that is your trans journey, but that is not what makes you trans. That starting seed is. And I know there's all the nonsense that people go like, well, somebody could just say, and then they infiltrate our spaces. But that's just the LGBTQIA plus version of the exact same thing that the conservatives do. If somebody's coming into queer spaces and being a creep and being weird and off-putting and inappropriate, eject them for those reasons. You're not required to put up with someone just because they say they are one of us. This is part of what infuriates me so much about some of the discourse around Ezra Miller and people even from within the LGBTQIA plus community who try to insist that they are not non-binary. I don't want them to be. I would love nothing more than to be able to disregard Ezra Miller and pretend that they are not part of my community. I would love that. And I understand the instinct for people to go like, I bet that Ezra Miller isn't actually, because like they've been a big jerk about like their pronouns and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, sometimes people who hold these identities legitimately are going to be assholes. We are not going to be an asshole-free community. No community is. But that doesn't invalidate their identity. Unless you find actual evidence, not just a desire of, boy, wouldn't it be great if they weren't actually non-binary and then concocting reasons why. Actually build a case that isn't based on, well, they're a jerk about it. Yeah, people who hold the identity authentically are just as capable of being jerks about it as someone who doesn't. Looking for reasons to eject people from our community does nothing but splinter us and leave people who need community abandoned. And I do not find that acceptable. When non-binary people come within trans spaces and get rejected because they don't match the story that you hear most often from binary trans people, and they are told, no, you don't belong here, I find that unacceptable. And I've heard even flimsier arguments like, well, their trans experience isn't the same as ours, which is the exact same thing that TERFs say against trans women. You didn't have a fundamental female experience growing up, so you can't be a woman. Nobody's experience is going to match yours 100%. And the sun has come out more. It's completely blown out this shot. I'm not going to wait for it to go away and start over again. So many of the arguments that I see coming from within the trans community that question or reject non-binary as being trans, so many of them are mirrors to the arguments that conservatives and TERFs use against us. Don't do that. Don't. Non-binary is trans. Non-binary people are trans. If they choose to just identify as non-binary and not lean on the idea that they're trans, they're not required to. If they want to be part of the trans community, they should have a place there. Is their experience going to be different from binary trans people? Yeah. So is literally everyone else's in the room. Non-binary people belong under their own umbrella, which is under ours. I say they, but really it's we. Again, gender fluid. I am a form of non-binary. Now, I've shifted as time has happened over my gender journey. I am present feminine far more often, almost never masculine, but I've still got my days where I'm like, nah, I don't identify with any of this. And that's valid. And so are other non-binary people, whatever their experience might be. If you don't identify as the gender you were assigned at birth, you are trans. I bring that up again because that is it. Everything else is overcomplicating a very simple metric. What were you assigned at birth? Do you identify with that gender? If the answer is no, they are trans. Everything else is unnecessary. Not necessarily to the individual. They may want to have their own journey and sort out who they are. But like for us as a community, in terms of whether or not we welcome them, that's it. That should be the only thing that matters. So there we go. Thank you for listening. Sorry for what's probably going to be very inconsistent lighting over the course of this video. It was quite a cloudy day, and I thought it was going to be fine. But then the clouds disappeared, and the sun is literally right there beaming through the window. So who knows? Feels like I'm getting a glimpse of what it's going to be like when my hair goes completely white. Oh well. Thank you very much for listening. I know I got a little bit heated over the course of that, but what I really want you to remember, what is the most important thing about all this? You are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. Thank you very much for watching, and take care.